All right, so I am digitally inking clean vector line work within Illustrator. Like I did for my logo, I'm building it on top of a sketch that I brought in. And at the end, that sketch will be turned off. The sketch is a raster file, so you can see the pixels there, very soft. But my line work will be perfectly clean and as smooth as possible, no matter what screen it's showing on, or what printer or what size I choose, because it's a vector. So that's the advantage of having vector line work, and you're required to do vector line work for yours. Now, like we learned for the logo, there's lots of ways to do vector line work. You could simply scan in an inked drawing, clean it up, and then live trace it within Illustrator. But I love this tool, which is the Blob brush tool, because I can set it to have a variation of size that's pressure sensitive to my tablet. And the most helpful thing, which you can't do in Photoshop, is I can set it to be smoother rather than accurate. So for instance, if I draw, I can go thick to thin or thin to thick, and it will smooth it out for me as I go. If I want it thicker than that, I can set all of my parameters just by double clicking it. Now the other benefit of working in Illustrator is if I want to change it, the Blob brush saves each as a path. So I can go to my pencil tool, my trusty pencil tool, I can hold down Command to get the select tool so I get see the anchors, and I can redraw the inside and the outside of these lines, should I so wish. I think I'm just going to try to commit to my Blob brush here. I love how it smooths it out for me. Takes a little while, you get the feel. And if anything, I'm trying to improve on my sketch. There we go. And it's just the same as inking on a piece of tracing paper, except it's a lot easier to undo it and try it again. You don't need whiteout or blades on vellum to undo your inking. The other thing you can do is just use the small selection tool, and I can move the anchors around, right? So if I want them to go to a thinner point, I can do that. I'll collapse the anchors a little bit. So there's a lot of advantages. Doing these as vectors. So when I drag one anchor right on top of the other, it will collapse it into a single point. I don't want it quite that thin, so I'm just going to move these rounded anchors from my Blob brush together a little bit to make them a little bit more pointy just on the inside. You do have to hover over it until you find the anchors, which can be a bit of a pain. And then, of course, you can also control their curve with these handles. There we go. Now, any illustrator could show you lots of tricks that they like to use, that they've learned over their experience. I'm most interested in you just getting started and trying to figure out how to do what you're most excited about. You can find lots of online tutorials with different tips and tricks for different styles. But this is your chance to figure out what you want to do with it. So I'm going to set my pencil to be a little smoother, so I redraw this outside line, kind of transition it. There we go. Hold down Command, I can redraw this inside a little bit, make it into what I want. So I'm going for the cute monster here. So there's nothing wrong with rounded edges, but they're not always the most helpful for what you're going for. And to me, good illustration is about strong choices, knowing what you're going after. All right, so now more blob brush. The hardest thing with blob brush is the hardest thing with actual inking, and that's getting kind of clean, contained shapes, especially things like ovals, speech bubbles, things like that. But unlike just using ink on paper, this allows you to redraw them and refine them after the fact. Don't worry about getting it right exactly at first. You can then go in and you can tweak them. So here, for instance, I'll just take my pencil tool and I'll round it out. And then on the outside, I'll just use it to smooth it together. Oops. I don't want the talons to be too scary. I'm keeping them nice and rounded at the ends. And sometimes you just need to smooth it, and that's underneath the pencil tool, the smooth tool, and it will help average out your curves should you need that. So remember, with the blob brush, this is what I like about it, but it's kind of, you have to understand it. The inside and the outside of the ink are different. They're different paths. So you have to correct them both independently. So I can push out the outside of the line to where I want it, like so. Then I also have to do the same thing to the inside. That way I can really play with the thickness. Then of course I can use the smooth tool, average it all out. There we are. More blob brush. Now this is pretty strong outline. I'm doing a kind of a Pokemon style, which have very strong outlines. But you feel free to do anything you want with yours. You might have lots of tiny like dash marks for your ink work, or really heavy black shapes. It's usually called full bleed inking, where lots is filled in fully. There are certain design concerns I'm trying to be aware of. And that's how you can improve upon your sketch. I didn't want that talon to touch this frill, or that's called a tangency in design. It's very uncomfortable. So instead I leave a little empty space. I might even exaggerate that empty space. You want contrast. You want to make strong decisions. Another tangency here, I don't want this bottom talon to go beyond the tail. I want the tail to have its own identity. And if you totally mess up like that, it was a weird angle, you can always undo and you can always refine it. Maybe the advantage I still see of using just a usual ink pen on tracing paper and then scanning it is that I can turn that paper. And in Photoshop you can, but in Illustrator you can't like tilt the paper to get a better surface for different curves. And that's where fancier tablets like Cintiqs are really nice. So you can move the actual digital surface you're painting on very easily. Now you can add with the blob brush at any time like that, but it's not going to smooth it out. So it might be better for you to make those corrections with your pencil tool. And remember that in Illustrator, the settings on your tools is really important. The setting on your blob brush and on your pencil is largely going to determine what gets rendered.